call both of them procurement, but there is a difference between them. And so through the lectures, we're going to see the difference. And some of you will know what you do in your institution is procurement or you are doing purchasing, right? So even in an organization where they have both procurement and purchasing combined, but you will know whether you're doing the procurement function or the purchasing function. So that's what we want to look at. So let's see the definition of the two. So for procurement is the process of acquiring goods, works, and services from a external supplier to fulfill the demand of a business or government entity. So normally in procurement, you will deal with suppliers that are outside your organization or outside of your business. So it has to do with external supplier. It has to do with sourcing supplier from outside, because that's how the supply chain works. For example, everybody have the core competence. So in procurement, you will source supplier from outside to meet the demand of your business. So every procurement starts with needs, and the needs is what we call demand. So when there are needs from various departments, you will collect those needs and be able to analyze them and design your sourcing strategy. So for purchasing, it refers specifically to the process of acquiring goods and services. It is a subset of procurement. Procurement is an end-to-end process. It starts from sourcing, needs analysis, specification, procurement strategy, while purchasing is there to fulfill purchase order. Normally, when you issue the purchase order, purchasing begins from there, right? So for procurement, it's not just simply about buying goods or services. It involves managing supplier, managing your supply chain, identifying the needs of the organization. It has to do with forecasting. When you forecast your need properly, when you know the consumption rate of your institution, then you are able to project what they would need for the coming year. So that's what procurement normally do. Then for purchasing, it involves activities like placing orders, receiving inspection of goods and services, and managing payment. So that's a transactional side of procurement, which is called purchasing. So procurement is strategic in nature, while purchasing is tactical and operational. So that's some of the things you need to know about the both of them. They are not the same. So let's see the key areas of focus. So for procurement, it focuses on sourcing supplier. That means finding reliable and competitive supplier. You want to find supplier that will be able to fulfill the demand of your organization and give you value for money. So procurement has to do with sourcing, while on the other end, purchasing starts from issuing purchase order, where you send a formal request for goods or services. So that is more transactional, right? Well, when the procurement have done all of the sourcing activity and the selection, then you raise the purchase order and start to expedite the process. Another key focus area is contracting. So for procurement focuses on negotiation, signing contract with supplier. So they go through all of the formalities, signing contract, negotiating for favorable term to meet the business needs, while purchasing focuses on managing deliveries. When will the item be delivered to the institution, or when will the service be delivered? So they are looking at the delivery aspect, the order processing aspect of the procurement cycle. Then another issue is vendor management. So procurement builds relationship with vendor. It's not just a one-off transaction. It's about a process where you're building relationship with vendors over time, because the supplier or the vendor are very strategic to your business or to your entity. The government entity will not function when you don't have external supplier. So you want to manage relationship with the supplier. You want to open your database, have the supplier scorecard, manage the performance and everything. Unlike purchasing, where it focuses on transaction, it looks at one-off purchase. There's not too much relationship building in purchasing. It's more transactional. So for example, it has to do with processing payment, how supplier will get the payment, supplier submits the invoice, they make sure they process the invoice, they do the three-way matching and ensure that the supplier invoice is correct, then they raise the payment. So both of them got their own focus area. But then don't be confused They can be called procurement because they fall in the wider procurement cycle. But we want to divide them by function. You know that which function is procurement and which function is purchasing, which is very, very important for you to know that. So that's where the focus are. And so we want to look at the cycle of purchasing and procurement. So both of them, you will see needs identification, but you're going to see the difference as we go through them. So let's start with procurement on the right-hand side. So procurement identifies needs. And then apart from needs identification, procurement also analyzes the market. Procurement wants to know the market structure. They want to know the forces of demand and supply, how it interacts with prices. They want to know the fair price of the product, so they will do market analysis. They also want to know whether that product is available in the market. So procurement will do a lot of market analysis and market research. Then for purchasing, they identify the need, they issue requests for purchase. So in their own process, they're not doing anything like need analysis. They're just issuing requests for purchase because they already got a preferred supplier that they are raising the purchase order on. So you see the form is more transactional, it's not strategic. So we come back to the procurement cycle. So for market analysis, procurement goes to developing the procurement strategy. Now, every procurement you do, you must have a strategy. How in procurement, you have to develop a strategy. How are you going to carry on the procurement process? How will you get a supplier to pay for your procurement process? How are you going to evaluate them? What measure will you use to do the evaluation? What will be the timeline to achieve that procurement goal? These are broader spectrum that procurement look at. Unlike purchasing, where they look at the approval of the request. So when a request is made, the purchaser wants to know whether that request has been approved by top management. Once it has been approved, he can go ahead. So but procurement look at strategy, while purchasing will just look at the approval process. And so we come back to the procurement cycle. Procurement defines specification. Procurement has a critical role to play in specification development. Procurement has a role to play with the subject matter expert. So as you know that when you're doing a specification, you work along with the subject matter expert, the end user, and the procurement officer. So the procurement officer is there to give some legal advice, a commercial advice when it comes to specification. So procurement is there to define specification, to list the requirement of that procurement of the end users. Why purchasing creates the purchase order. They are concerned about raising the purchase order and sending the purchase order to the supplier. So normally you will see institutions are doing purchasing. They normally have preferred supplier base. They are not doing any really strategic sourcing. They just go about dealing with one or two suppliers and they raise the order, the purchase order, and send for goods and service. So that's transactional. That is a procurement function, but it's a purchasing function in this sense because it's nothing strategic. Procurement covers the whole thing. Procurement is an umbrella term, while purchasing is a subset of the entire procurement process. So we come back to the procurement cycle again. It has to do with supplier sourcing and selection. So in the procurement process, you want to make sure that you put your sourcing strategy, you list your requirements that you will use to evaluate supplier, and you use an invitation to pay or request for quotation or request for proposal to make sure you get supplier on board that will be able to take part in the process. And you also want to make the process competitive so that you can have a lot of suppliers on board and you can look among the prices, look among other after-sales service that they will render to your institution. Now for purchasing, they send the PO to the supplier. So they send the PO to a preferred supplier. They not carry on a strategic sourcing process where they want to evaluate the supplier or invite supplier. They just raising the purchase order on that supplier. So let's look at something. In the broader procurement cycle, procurement have done need analysis, specification development, invitation to pay. They have also done, let's say, pay evaluation, select the most responsive supplier, and then raising the purchase order now, the purchaser pick up from there. So I want you to understand it in that sense also. So for purchase, the purchaser, they receive goods and services because they are the transactional end. They expedite the process and make sure that goods and services arrive on time. Then for procurement, they will issue requests for quotation or tendering or request for proposal. Now, these are solicitation documents that procurement uses to solicit bids or quote from suppliers. And then inspect. For purchasing, inspect and verify. So purchasing do what we call quality control. When the goods come to the institution, they will not just allow you to enter the institution like that. They're going to do quality control, inspect the quantity and the quality of that goods, and ensure that it meets the quality standard before it is taken to the warehouse or given to the end user. So they're there to inspect goods and services, while procurement evaluate and select supplier. So supplier evaluation or pay evaluation is a kind of procurement function. It's strategic in nature because it has to do with critical steps, it has to do with analysis, it has to do with preliminary evaluation, technical evaluation, and financial evaluation. So that's a procurement function. So when we look at the purchasing cycle again, on the left-hand side, we see receive invoice. So the invoice what the supplier gave after he has delivered the goods, he sends his invoice. So the procuring entity or the purchaser will look at that invoice and make sure he wants after the supplier payment. That way he initiates the payment process. And so when we look at the procurement cycle, we see contract, award, and negotiation. So in procurement, before you even award a contract, even though the man is the most responsible payer, and you send him that letter of accepting that you have been the most responsible payer for this procurement process, that doesn't make the man automatically to have the contract. So what happens is that he needs to sign a formal contract. When he signs that contract, then the contract process begins. Somebody please mute yourself first. You gotta mute yourself. So then the contract management process begins. So procurement negotiation is a whole course, it's a whole process. It has to do with planning, it has to do with win-win situation. You want to make sure that in the negotiation process, you win and the supplier win. Because remember, you're doing business with supplier. If you win and the supplier lose and that supplier is strategic to your business, it becomes a problem. All right? So everybody please mute. Okay, so we come to make payment. So in the purchasing cycle, you make sure that supplier receive the payment on time. But for procurement, purchase order management. And then for purchasing, you got record transaction, procurement inspect quality, and check the product. So that's it for the procurement cycle and the purchasing cycle. Now we made the cycle too so you can understand the distinction, but the purchasing cycle falls in the broader procurement cycle. Like I said earlier, it starts where you issue or create the purchase order. And you want to make sure that the purchase order is approved before issuing it to a supplier. You want to make sure the reputable authority in your institution sign that purchase order before you issue it to the supplier, and then it becomes legitimate. And also remember, purchase order can also serve as a contract in an institution. You can send purchase order and write your terms and conditions on that purchase order. But when the process is more complex, you have to do a formal agreement where you have to craft, and the purchase order will make reference to that contractor or contract agreement. So record transaction and inspect quality and check. The key difference between the two. So for procurement is broader in scope. You know, when we talk about scope, scope is all of what the project will contain. So for example, if you're doing project management, you say scope, you're talking about all the activities that will be included in that project. So if you say broader scope, that means procurement activity is much broader than purchasing. Number two is strategic. That means procurement plays a strategic role. They are not just buyer. Procurement is no longer a back office function where people just go and buy goods and negotiate lower price. No, it has a strategic role. It manages risks, it manages supply chain, and what have you. So it is long-term focus. It focuses on long-term achievement of the organizational goal. That's why in strategic procurement, you align the procurement with the goal of your organization. For example, if you are in a project, the project has an overall goal. You make sure you align your procurement strategy with that project goal. So unlike purchasing on the right-hand side of the slide, it's narrower. I mean, it's narrow. It has to do with issuing purchase order, managing the purchase ordering process. It's tactical in nature, tactical or operational. So when we say tactical or operational, we're talking about day-to-day activities. It focuses on short-term goal. So purchasing achieves short-term goal while procurement achieves long-term goal. So the next thing is it involves planning. So procurement has to do with planning. But procurement involves planning. So you see an institution where you do an aggregate planning for the year. That before the fiscal year begins, you start to do your planning, collect needs from different departments, and submit those needs to the finance or to the health entity so they can budget for those needs. Then that means you're doing procurement. So it involves planning, it involves supplier relationship management. So procurement manages supplier. Supplier are potential business partners. So they need to be managed. They are strategic to your business. Maybe let's say you're into manufacturing and the supplier you are managing, these are suppliers that are supplying your inputs for you to manufacture and take your product to the market. So these suppliers are strategic to your business. So you need to manage them. Even in the public sector, you need suppliers. Suppliers are very key to enhance government operation. If you don't have a supplier, nobody will supply you with various products, it becomes a problem for the entity and you will not be able to operate or function. So managing supplier is a key procurement function. While on purchasing is a transactional process of acquiring goods and services. So just bear in mind that purchasing focuses more on transaction. It's about receiving the product. It's more reactive in nature. It's not a procurement. Purchaser does not run to identify needs. They're there to raise the purchase order, or when the request is issued, they make sure that request is approved, and then they carry on the activities. So that's why in big companies, you'll see that they got procurement manager and they got purchasing manager, and all of them fall in the procurement department. Now, the procurement manager role is more strategic, and the purchasing manager focuses mostly on transaction in the water procurement cycle. So in Liberia, for example, you have a lot of government entities, they got procurement department, they will not say purchasing, but they got people who doing the purchasing role, for example, expediter. Those who expedite the process are purchaser in that regard. Those who issue the purchase order, if that's your function, that means you carry on the purchasing function in your institution. That's what it means. So get it clear. So procurement does market analysis, contract negotiation, and supplier selection process. So procurement will go through all kind of process, will go through bid opening, and all of that, especially in the public sector. There are some NGOs also that have a standardized bid opening process. And then you got some small Liberian businesses where they're just doing purchasing. So I have a book coming up. I hope you grab a copy. It's about entrepreneur and small business, how they can cut costs in procurement. Yeah, because most of them doing the purchasing instead of doing the water procurement strategy. So for purchasing, you got order placement. So for the purchaser, he places the order. He makes sure the goods is received, and then payment processing. Make sure he runs after the supplier payment. So if the contract says 30 days from the submission of invoice, payment will be made, is that purchaser responsibility to make sure that that supplier is paid. Supplier being paid in a transaction is very much important. It keeps the supplier to be loyal to your business. So that is very key. So if you're in the purchasing function and you are processing supplier payment, make sure that you get on the back of the finance team and other stakeholders to ensure that the supplier gets paid on time. It's key. It's key to your business or your entity. Then on the left-hand side, procurement focus on supplier relationship and long-term strategic objective. So let's look at something, for example. If procurement want to save costs for an organization, they're looking at that cost saving in the long term, while the purchaser look at the cost saving in the short term. For example, the purchaser raised the purchase order, and you want to make sure that the goods is supplied meet quality standards. Those goods that doesn't meet the standards are returned to the supplier. So it has short-term role in reducing costs. while procurement look at the broader strategy, look at risk management, look at analysis of the market, look at how they can co-invest with a supplier in the long term that will reduce costs. So that's the difference between the two. Purchasing reduces costs in the short term, while procurement reduces costs in the long term. So procurement is a proactive process. I mean, the procurement officer does not wait for people to submit need, even though he's not the one that identified the need, but he makes sure he works with the end user department to make sure that if you people have needs, submit it to the procurement unit. So the procurement role is more proactive than that of purchasing. Purchasing is reactive. I mean, you wait for the process to go on for them to evaluate supplier or evaluate quote, and then you raise your purchase order and start your transactional process. Long-term planning. So for procurement, have long-term planning, normally in months or year. So in the public sector, you plan on a yearly basis. There are some NGOs probably they plan for 6 months, some of them plan for a year. But then you will see that purchasing has short-term planning. You really want to get your goods or services that you purchase and make sure that you arrive on time. So the planning is normally short-term, while procurement planning is long-term. And so we want to look at key activities in procurement and purchasing. So let's start with procurement, needs identification and planning. So procurement starts with needs identification, and it is the planning process. For example, if you identify needs from various departments, that will help you, it will enable you to be able to plan better, to plan a better procurement strategy. And you'll be able to link your planning with your procurement budget. Yes, that's very important. So the second thing about procurement, it does market research and supplier, or market and supplier research. So you want to research supplier. For example, if you do an RFQ, so that RFQ, if you don't do market research, you might not know who are the potential supplier that will want to bid for that RFQ process. So procurement do market and supplier research. They also research on supplier. For example, you want to research on a supplier, you want to see a customer feedback. Go on your website, see which are the feedbacks the customer have been giving about your product. All right, these are things that procurement unit or procurement officer do. The next thing, they develop a sourcing strategy. Sourcing means finding and selecting supplier that will be useful to your procurement process, that will help you to achieve value for money. So procurement there for sourcing development, sourcing strategy development, and also supplier pre-qualification and selection. So there are times where before people partake in the procurement process, they do what they call pre-qualification. The pre-qualification is to identify potential supplier that will be part of that process. So in the pre-qualification stage, they rationalize the supplier base. That means they eliminate certain supplier, and the remaining guys that pass the pre-qualification questionnaire will be the one that will remain in the bidding process. So when the bidding starts, they will issue them the bidding document to fill in and be part of the competitive process. And then another thing is request for proposal or tender management. So procurement manages the bidding process. That's why you will see procurement will send invitation to bid, supplier will bid, the timing will be there. When that invitation comes, also they will specify in the RTB the time the bid will close. The moment the bid submission closes, the next thing is they start the bid opening process, where the chairman for the bid opening will be there, procurement unit will be there to take minutes and what have you. So they manage the entire RFQ or the tender process. Procurement manage that. Also, supplier evaluation and negotiation. So procurement sets the criteria to evaluate supplier. That's why as a procurement officer, you need integrity, because you set the criteria to evaluate supplier. Make sure you set a fair criteria. Your specification should be generic in nature. That means it should not favor a particular supplier. Make sure it's open and it favors all of the supplier. Now, for example, let's say there's a new procurement you are doing and you don't have much idea on the specification, and you issue request for information. Supplier submitted various information concerning the specification. So you combine all of what is submitted and make it a generic specification so that it becomes competitive, where everybody can pay and everybody have equal chance to win the contract. And then contract management and drafting. So for the contract management and drafting, it also depends, right? Normally, when you're doing an engineering contract, you have an engineer to be the contract manager. But there are other contracts that the procurement unit or procurement officer can manage. So procurement also help in contract drafting. As a procurement officer, you should know how to draft contract. It's very key. Now you will draft the contract, and the legal team in your institution will review the contract and give the input whether the contract violates any legal principle or laws. And then you make correction to that. The procurement officer should be able to draft contract. So that is a procurement function. Then risk assessment and mitigation. And many of you in your procurement function, you don't assess risks. You just carry on your function like that. Standardized procurement process, standardized procurement practice calls for risk assessment and management. It's very key because you don't know what might come up during your procurement process. So you plan for risks ahead, and then you plan the mitigation strategies that you'll be able to use to mitigate that risk. Reduce the level of impact of that risk on your procurement process. So that's a function of procurement, risk assessment and mitigation. Another thing, sustainability and compliance oversight. Now there's a new thing coming up called green procurement. It's very important. You want to do procurement and maintain the environment. Your procurement should not harm the environment. So you want to maintain green or sustainable procurement practices. You want to incorporate it into your procurement strategy. For example, you want to deal with suppliers that are green, that are not causing waste in the environment. That will help to eliminate waste because procurement spend a lot of funding in institutions. So you can incorporate green procurement in your procurement strategy or in your requirement to select suppliers. Stakeholder engagement. Of course, there are a lot of stakeholders in the public sector. You got a procurement committee. They are stakeholders. They are made of top directors and managers in the government ministry. You got maybe the NGO stakeholders would be the procurement committee too. Some of them are not called it procurement committee. They have other names that they call it. But there are a lot of stakeholders in the procurement process. Even the external supplier are stakeholders. For the public sector, even the media, they are stakeholders in the procurement process. Civil society organization are stakeholders in the procurement process. So there are a lot of stakeholders. So basically, you want to deal with your internal stakeholders and make sure you are in compliance and don't offend your external stakeholders. That is very key because sometimes the public sector, when you're doing bid opening, journalists or other civil society actors will come and witness your bid opening. And if you don't follow the strategic process and bailer raises concern after the process, it becomes an issue. So be very careful as we execute your function. Then capacity building and training. That's what we're doing right now. Procurement officer needs to be trained every time. It's an ongoing process, continuous professional development to keep you well secure on the job and to make you more innovative and competent to execute the procurement function. So that is very important. So let's look at the purchasing aspect. Key purchasing activities. So creating and issuing the purchase order. You want to create the purchase order, that means raise the purchase order, put the period a requirement in the purchase order, the quantity, the item you want, and make sure that purchase order is signed by the reputable authorities, and then you issue the purchase order to supplier. Now, what nobody happy, you issue the purchase order, maybe issue 2 copies to the supplier because he had to return 1 copy by email to you that he has signed. So once he signed, that means a contract has been formalized. Communicating orders to supplier. So you want to communicate, maybe talk with the supplier through your expediting process to make sure that he supplies you just what you put in that purchase order. Order tracking and expediting. So you want to track your order in real time. You want to know how far, what have been the progress with your order from the supplier. And you also want to expedite the process to make sure that your order arrives on time. Receiving goods and services. So since transactional, is there to receive goods and services. But mind you, I will show you where also procurement does inspection, and I will show you how procurement inspection is done. So that is key for you to note. So inspecting delivery for quality and quantity. So on the purchasing, on the transactional side of the procurement cycle is where you do inspection for quality The quality is the kind of specification you put there. You want to know what they got meet the quality standard is key, and it's there to control quality in your organization. You want anything defective to enter your institution. Effective inspection is key in procurement. You also want to inspect quantity because the desired quantity is important. Remember, in procurement, one of the rights is the right quantity. So you want to make sure the quantity that you put on that purchase order is what the supplier delivers. That is very, very, very key. In the absence of quantity, it might hinder your operation. So it's very, very important. Then involve matching and verification. What we call the three-way matching. You match the purchase order with the supplier invoice and the goods received note, and make sure that the three of them match. When they match, then that is okay. You can now start to get the supplier invoice and process his payment. Mind you, in this inspection process, for example, the supplier issues some product that are defective. You have to return that product to the supplier. Make sure you jot it down in your return template and send it back to the supplier. So that will help you that if you're making payment, you're able to reduce that amount from the supplier invoice. That is very, very key. Or if you will send the product, then that's good. So that is key. Then processing payment. So it's a purchasing activity where you process the payment of the supplier. Every organization has different hierarchy that you go through, but all the same, you want to make sure that when the supplier submits his invoice, the time stipulated for the supplier to receive a payment in the contract, you want to make sure that is done. Managing purchasing record. You want to keep record of the purchase order, record of the request, record of the goods received note. You know, all of those documents you want to keep them because they will help you to safeguard you in the end. It will become document that will be used as audit trail. So when auditor comes, they want to look at the document, review them, and ensure that you are in compliance during the procurement or the purchasing process. And then managing returns and replacement. So for example, you can manage return. You send the product back, and when the supplier send the replacement, you can also keep record of that. So the purchaser manages returns and replacement. Also manage purchase catalog. So liaising with finance for budget alignment. Yeah, you want to liaise with finance, very key as a purchaser because finance is the one that make the payment while you process the payment. So in the payment process, you're working along with finance. So in the whole procurement function, you're working with various departments. You work with legal when you are drafting your specification. You work with the end user department when you're developing a specification, getting a requirement. You work with them. When you're drafting the contract, you work with legal. When you're about to do payment, you work with finance. So your role is cross-functional. So some of the soft skills you will need is relationship management. Have good relationship with people. It's very important. Yeah. So liaison with finance for budget alignment. So let's get to the next slide. So I look at inspection in purchasing and inspection in procurement. Now the function inspection will occur at various points, especially in contract management, supplier performance, and project-based procurement. So let's look at how procurement under inspection work. Even though purchasing and procurement in the same cycle, but let's look at some key difference. For example, you develop a contract where the payment is tied to performance or achieving key milestone. So for example, you sign a contract with a supplier to bill you 3-story building. Now, the first milestone is to do the foundation and finish the foundation. They will come and inspect your performance. Procurement will come and inspect the performance of that foundation. And when that foundation meets the quality standard as specified in the bidding document, you have reached a specific milestone and the performance, they will pay you. Then they go down from elevating the building to the first floor. Maybe that could be another milestone they inspect. So you see how procurement inspection is more strategic. Yeah. So for purchasing inspection, it shows that goods or services received match the purchase order in quantity and quality. So for them, they're looking at the purchase order. Does it match quality standard? Does it match the quantity required to do the job or for this person to function in the office? So purchasing looks at that. The focus. is part of the broader supplier relationship and compliance management. Remember, in the institution, the person that enforces the procurement policy is the procurement unit. You want to make sure you even advise your manager or your head of entity to go by the procurement guideline. In the public sector, in Liberia, you got the PPCC Act. It's the framework that governs procurement operation in this country. So whosoever that person can be in the entity, they want to go against the policy, stick to the policy, advise them on what the act says. You in the NGO sector, donors got their own requirement. They got their own procurement framework. For example, the World Bank got their own procurement standards. So those who listen with the World Bank or subscribing to the World Bank as a project, World Bank is almost like the PPCC to them. World Bank gave them the criteria, the framework for the procurement process. Then when USAID were here, those who were subscribing with USAID as a project, they also follow the USAID procurement standard. Other local NGOs and other NGOs got their own procurement framework and policy. As a good procurement officer, understand the procurement framework. Know it to your fingertip. It helps you to be valuable in your institution. It makes you valuable. It adds value to your role. You're not just sitting down buying, but you are quoting the law and making specific reference to the law to caution those who want to violate the framework or the policy. Very important. You're in the private sector, the policy is more flexible. In the manufacturing sector, private sector manufacturing, private sector retail business is more flexible, but it's also good to have a fake procurement policy. And you, the procurement officer, there must understand that procurement manual or policy. That's very, very important. Yes. And so for purchasing, often handled by storekeeper, user department, or quality control team. For procurement, who does it can involve technical expert, procurement staff, or a standard inspector. So it depends on your procurement framework and policy. So it's not a one fitted all. So let's see an example for procurement. During a construction project, multiple inspection may be scheduled at different milestones to ensure supplier compliance with contract specification. So like I just said, there can be multiple milestones and performance review during the contract to ensure that supplier meet quality standard. They are not going to wait until the man carry the whole building up before they inspect. At every stage, payment is start to achieving a milestone and performance according to quality standards, which is very key. Now, an example of purchasing, after receiving 100 office chair, the team checks for defects of damage before accepting delivery. So you want to check and make sure that all the defective product, all the defective chair are removed and sent back to the supplier, and you take the one that meets quality standard. And the supplier can change the one with the original quality, and you can accept it. Yes. So that's the key focus or the key area in inspection for purchasing and for procurement. So we count the risks. I look at risk management, the two. Even though the risk is managed holistically, but we try to divide the two so we can see it. So for risk management in purchasing on the left side and risk management in procurement on the right side. So let's see the scope of the risk. Remember, I told you the definition of what the scope is. The scope involves all the activities in the project. That's a scope. So let's see the scope of risk management in purchasing. It's operational. They look at the day-to-day risk that may affect the business or the entity. So it's transaction specific. Risk is analyzed based upon the transaction. For procurement, it's a strategic and what? End-to-end. So the risk start from sourcing to need analysis to budgeting all the way to delivery. So procurement risk covers the entire procurement cycle. The focus, purchasing risk focus basically on delivery. You want to make sure that products are delivered in the right quantity, at the right time, at the right place, at the right price. So it focuses on delivery. So you want to plan for delivery risks. Also for the price. You want to plan also for the invoice. Make sure that you process the supplier invoice on time. You identify all the risks that might happen, all the bureaucratic process that might hinder you from making sure that supplier is paid on time. Quality checks. You want to identify, you want to make sure you plan for quality check, plan your risk management for quality check, and make sure that whatever product will go through or strenuous quality check procedures. Then for procurement, you want to manage supplier risks, market risks. Yeah, for example, you in the public sector, you understand that there are certain procurement, for example, if you're doing procurement of works for road, when you do your procurement schedule, you got to be very careful with the rainy season, because you know during the rainy season, no works can go on like building road. That is impossible. So you make sure you're planning and you take into consideration the dry season for project implementation. Don't make a mistake and make the project implementation to be in the rainy season. You will be a failed procurement officer. Don't do that. And then procurement also look at proactive and long term. So they look at risk management in a long term, and they take proactive steps to deal with that risk management. Unless purchasing, where they're waiting for the reactive part to see how they can plan for risk or mitigate risks. Then we come to the approach. Purchasing is more reactive and immediate. It's something that you need now. You place your purchase order and you are waiting for that order to be fulfilled. So immediate and reactive. Now, something that is reactive, or a person that is reactive, the person that waits to take action. But a proactive person takes action even before something happens. So that's the difference. So the tools for purchasing risk management is order tracking. Inspection is the tools to manage risk in purchasing. Approval system is also a tool. You want to make sure that you don't want to approve or send any purchase order that not pass through the appropriate approval process. So for purchasing, it look at risk mapping. It map the entire procurement cycle, map all of the risks involved. Yeah. It look at supplier audit report and look at policy risks, violation of procurement policy or manual. So the impact level for operation, for purchasing rather, it affects daily operation and efficiency, while procurement risks affects organizational or organization performance and goal. So the entire goal of the organization can be affected if you don't plan and mitigate procurement risks strategically. So that's with procurement risks and purchasing risks. So then look at them. Key transactional document in the procurement plan. In the product procurement cycle, you will have a procurement plan, and you will do your aggregate planning for the year. In the purchasing side, you got purchase order as a key document. You raise the purchase order to send to the supplier. Procurement have invitation to pay. You want to solicit supplier, you want to send invitation to treat, so supplier can come and be part of your competitive billing process or your restricted billing, whatever it is. So for purchasing, you have goods received note. I mean the note that the supplier issue with the goods. That you receive that good received note is a purchasing document. Request for proposal is a procurement document because it's strategic. And you have delivery note as a purchasing document. Also, you got base submission form in procurement. There are base submission form. And then in purchasing, you got invoice. In procurement, you got evaluation report. Normally in the public sector, you got base evaluation report. It's a key procurement document. Yes, when they want to conduct audit, they want to look at the evaluation report to see if you guys are in compliance with the procurement process. For purchasing, you got payment budget. A payment budget is a document that approves payment of a vendor or a supplier. You got contract agreement in procurement, while in purchasing, you got stock and inventory card. Contract performance report, and in purchasing, you got return note. So they are not all, we have not exhausted all, but we exhaust some of the key things, key documents in purchasing and in procurement. So the procurement plan is normally a strategic document that shows how procurement will be executed over the life of the procurement cycle. Yes, the invitation to pay is there to invite suppliers to come and be part of a competitive process. Then you got base submission form. A form where the bidder will fill in for base submission. You got evaluation report. Like I said, evaluation report is something that The pay evaluation panel will draw the report, and that report is kept in the procurement department as a document. Very, very much important. The report highlights why a particular supplier was choosing, why he was the most responsive supplier, and all of that. Now, in the public sector bid document, they got a template for that. So, also the contract agreement. Procurement unit will normally keep contract agreement, give some to the supplier, give some to the maybe procurement unit or head of entity, and give another one to other key stakeholders. It's very important. You must have the contract document, because the contract document guides the entire contract process between you and the supplier. And then the contract performance report is after the contract been executed or during the execution of the contract. At various interval, you did a report, and at the end of the contract, you did a comprehensive performance report. So the purchase order is a document that the purchaser issued to the supplier for goods and services. You got a goods receipt note. It's a document that is setting that goods are being received by the purchasing entity. You got a delivery note that the goods are being delivered. You got an invoice that means when supplier already supplied the goods and services, you have to issue an invoice for a payment. So you make sure you go through that. The payment budget should be raised to approve the payment for that supplier. You got stock and inventory card. So when a particular product is leaving the warehouse, it's on that card. It's either debit or credit on the stock or purchasing card. Then you got a return note. Return those are those items that you return to the supplier after you did your quality check and you didn't meet your quality standards. So let's see the difference between a procurement manager and a purchasing manager. So we got procurement manager on the left and purchasing manager on the right. So like I said previously, in bigger institutions, companies, larger companies in the world, you will see that some of them got the procurement and the purchasing department, and the purchasing department falls under the procurement department. Some of them got it as one department, but they separate the function. They separate. Some of them are buyer, purchasing manager, and some of them are procurement officer, especially just like that. So the procurement manager develop and implement procurement strategy. He oversees the procurement strategy for the procurement unit, though he works along with his team. The purchasing manager places purchase order for goods or services. So he's there for the transactional part. When procurement have done all the strategic part, he raises the purchase order, make sure it's approved, and then he carries on his transaction. Procurement identify, evaluate supplier. The procurement manager identify, evaluate supplier. He has a role to play in the process. Though he might not be the one to go and sit on the pay evaluation panel, but you also debrief the panel. You also, sometimes some entity can even train the panel. The procurement manager will do that. And then the purchaser ensure timely delivery of materials. The purchasing manager want to ensure that the material is delivered on time, or the service is delivered on time, to enhance the organization performance in the market or performance for the public good. Then we have negotiate contract and long-term agreement. So the procurement manager will negotiate contract. Normally, contract management, especially when the contract is big, you got a lot of stakeholders involved. But procurement manager will be the leader of that contract. He spearheads the negotiation team to go and negotiate for that contract. Unlike the purchasing manager that monitor inventory level when necessary. So he wants to know, for example, in a business sense, how inventory is in the warehouse, what's the inventory level, what's the current stock level, whether he need to replenish that stock or he doesn't need stock at all. He plays a major role in cost saving in the long term, and he contributes to what? Budgeting for the organization. That is very key, because through the needs he submits, they're able to allocate budget for them. So he contributes to budgeting. Procurement spend a lot of budget of government entity and other private entity. And then the purchasing manager communicates with suppliers on order status and issue. So you want to make sure that he expedite the process, the status of the order, while the goods are being uploaded to the truck, whether it's on its way. So procurement is strategic. This procurement manager role is strategic. He manages the supplier relationship. He makes sure you have a database of supplier, monitor the performance, have a supplier scorecard, and what have you. He manages the performance. Why? The purchasing manager support procurement strategy at the operational level. So he there to support the overall procurement strategy, but he does that at the operational level. Procurement ensure compliance with procurement policy, while the purchasing manager expedite the delivery process, which is very, very, very key. So let's look at the organogram. A simple organogram to show you how in bigger institutions, got a procurement director, procurement officer, you got buyer. So for example, maybe you're just there to go and buy low value item where the value are not very high. So you're almost like the purchaser in that organization. You are a buyer. So normally you go and raise the purchase order for that low value purchase and go and buy. So you got a procurement officer above, under the procurement director, helping the procurement director to achieve the strategic goal of the procurement department to align with the organization. Why? The buyer is there to help procurement strategy achieve a goal at the operational level. So that's the organogram, a matrix that shows procurement and purchasing interacting in a department. So from here now, we want to move to the case study. You're going to read the case study. I will give everybody the chance. Make sure one at a time, put your hands up. There's a hands stop right on the screen there. Put your hands up. Tell me what you think about the case study. We want to brainstorm now, all right? So when you're ready to speak, just put your hands up, unmute yourself, and so we can go through. So we got the first case study. Are you seeing the case study?
Yes, we are seeing it.
Okay, so let me read it, and you listen carefully. You are seeing the screen, you can read it, and then make a decision and analyze it. So the Ministry of Health Liberia receives funding from an international donor to procure diagnostic machines, beds, and consumables for 15 hospitals nationwide. A cross-functional team is formed, including procurement officers, biomedical engineers, legal, and finance staff. They develop technical specification, identify potential international suppliers, prepare a request for proposal, and issue it through international competitive bidding. Due diligence is done on supplier, including quality audits and compliance with WHO standard. And the reason why they're using WHO standard because WHO is a key stakeholder in medical supplies. After final evaluation, a long-term contract with maintenance and training is signed. Questions. Which component of the scenario reflect procurement activities? Number one, would the final act of placing the order fall under purchasing? What risks would arise if the process were handled solely as a purchasing tax? So the floor is yours. I give you like 2-3 minutes, read through it, and start to give your opinion. That's the interactive section of the webinar. So the floor is open.
Which the components, the specific components that fall on this scenario that fall under the procurement activities is the whole standard form of the RFP, where the procurement team settled, the whole team was settled by the procurement director coming down to legal and going through all the policy plan and structure of the procurement plan was done. So we finalized that international bidding was done, and the bidding came back, competitive bidding was done. The bill was received. It went into committee room. Committee came out with the supplier based on the standard of the WHO, and the instruments or the material was to be supplied with training. So for the first scenario, the whole component will cover, it reflects a total procurement plan and a systematical function of a procurement system.
Okay. So what's with the second question?
Yeah, the second question, could the final act be placed? No, under purchasing, you found out that after the whole building process was done, it have some implementation of purchasing because the money will be paid and the goods or services will be received. Because you have two things here, you have goods and service. So the service is the training of the people to maintain this particular machine or the material that will be brought. So in another scenario, you will find out that purchasing also exists under this particular scenario. But when we're doing due diligence, the whole scenario elapsed under procurement analysis.
Okay, go ahead with the last question.
So the last one, what risks could arise if this process will handle? Okay, there are many risks because if they are only for purchasing, there will be for the RPF properly because it's just a short-term purchasing is a short-term scenario. Yeah. So with the long-term scenario, you need or due diligence and other people and the internet.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your point. Well taken.
That's my view.
So you can mute next person. Want to see how you understand the scenario. Yeah.
This is Jefferson speaking.
Okay, Jefferson, CEO.
Yeah, so the scenario reflects the different functions of procurement versus purchase. Now, as we have learned from the slide, procurement is strategic. That means that you have a strategic plan to reach your goal. While it is true that purchase also has a goal, but it's tactical. It is operational. Not that long term as compared to procurement. So in this scenario, if the procurement part is not played at all, I'm like kind of answering, the risks.
Number two.
Question.
Yeah, the risks. Number three.
If procurement is not part of this process where you discuss forming a cross-functional team that includes the biomedical engineers, include the legal person, and then the finance staff. They have diverse role to play in order to execute this project. And so, having not been this and just stay with procurement, how do you call it, purchase officer, it becomes a kind of a serious issue with this procurement plan. I mean, the issue of raising RFP is the function of the procurement person, not the finance person. When all of these things have been done, where you go through the bidding process, everything is done as per the criteria set up. Then, of course, the finance man is coming to just operationalize the process where you go do purchase, maybe do inspection, but all
the purchaser depends on the finance guy.
Yeah, the purchaser going to do the purchase. So I mean, but the procurement has already done a work where the specs are all listed. For example, this machine, you will need this specific thing that need to be bought, and I mean, people are trained to use it. That is goal oriented. That is strategic. That is strategic as compared to the purchase.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for your point. Well taken. Yeah, next person.
So, to answer the first question, the formation of the diverse department, individuals or department head to form part of the procurement team that access reflect on procurement activity. So we have about the procurement officer, the biomedical engineers, the legal and the financial staff. These are people from different departments. They are making part of the procurement team. And then another activity that reflects a procurement activity is the formation, the preparation of the request for proposal, the RFP, that issue based on international competitive bidding process. That will also serve as part of the procurement activity. Then as it relates to the second question, you say, will the final act of placing the order for honor purchasing? In my own understanding, I don't think it will fall under purchasing. I think it will fall under procurement activity.
No, but let me hold you there, Sam.
Okay.
Sam?
Yeah.
Let me hold you there. We said that purchasing is a subset of procurement, right? So when they place the purchase order, purchasing begins from there. It's in a wider procurement cycle, but from placing the purchase order, the purchasing activity starts from right there. Yeah.
Okay, yes, that's true. With the final act of placing the order for honor purchasing, so as it relates to like the explanation, so we can say yes. We can say yes, the for honor purchasing.
Because of the transactional part there now.
And the third question is
the strategic part already done.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for your point. Well taken.
So thank you for the correction. That's the for honor purchasing. And the third question he asked was, what risks will arise if the process were handled solely as a purchasing tax?
Yeah.
There are so many risks. One of the risks is the specification. If you're solely for processing, they could procure the raw material, or they could procure the wrong machine, or the wrong set of goods. That's one of the risks.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you so much.
Diverse individuals with the knowledge of what they want. They could help in a process.
Great.
So one of the reasons is the raw material or raw specification of the.
All right. Thank you, Sam. Your point well taken.
That's my take on the related to the question.
Yeah, thank you. Next person.
Yeah, so for me, the purpose of the scenario that reflects the procurement activity could be preparing the RFP.
Okay.
The company issuing
preparing.
RFP. Carefully checking the companies out, doing due diligence too.
Okay.
And for the second question, yes, I would say a false honor purchasing, because like you said, the last process, so the person
most
out of buying
transactional
goods and services. So yes, exactly.
Okay.
And then for the last question, the risk, risk could be that maybe because the purchasing, they could waste money, number one.
Okay.
They could be probably buying the wrong items based on the lack of the provision of specifications.
Okay, that's great. Now, let me just end with this note before we move to the next one. Everybody just save your comment for the next scenario.
I just want to talk on the last question.
Okay, go ahead. Let me give you the chance to do so. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we'll talk about what the risks were aroused if this process was handled solely by a purchasing tax. First of all, I want to understand that, without if it was handled solely by the purchasing tax, there will be significant risks, because the purchasing focuses on immediate need, so there will be a lack of strategic alignment. Yeah, so it focuses on immediate need. So the procurement consider the long-term goal that aligns with the overall strategy. So we'll have a risk attached to it, and also there will also be a disruption.
Okay, that's great. So thank you. I want to end this scenario on this note. That's why it's very important. That's why Bergman Consultancy, we want to help smaller institutions and companies to have procurement manual and be trained. Because when you just get a purchasing function, these are some of the risks involved. There will be no strategic process. There are a lot of entities, like brand businesses, where they just go and just buy, and they don't know they are losing a lot of money. So combining the purchasing function with procurement, making it more strategic, helps the organization to achieve a lot in the long term. But a lot of institutional eyes have not been open to these things. And so that's what we want to do, to provide them with the kind of training they need. Anyway, I will tell you more when we ending the webinar. So let's go to the next scenario. Reading and be reading along to understand it. So a retail chains operate 20 stores nationwide. I mean, they got a retail supply chain, the place of retail person in the supply chain, and they got 20 stores in the country, 20 different stores. So the central procurement team negotiate annual contract for groceries, cleaning items, and electronics with a pool supplier. Stores can make local purchases under 500 for urgent needs. Now take that into consideration. Urgent needs like cleaning material, print cartridges. Central procurement monitors vendor performance, updates catalogs, revises framework prices quarterly. A local store manager repeatedly purchases from an unapproved vendor offering lower prices but lower quality. Sorry, I should put lower quality there. So the questions are, which activities are procurement and which are purchasing? Separate the two. What risks do the local store manager action pose to the organization? Number 3, how can procurement maintain control without limiting purchasing flexibility? Yeah. That's scenario 2. Yeah.
Okay, based on scenario 2, I want to give an input.
Go ahead.
And I want to give an input. Hello?
Yeah, I'm hearing you, bro.
Okay, I want to give an input and let my input here. The first question, which activity are procurement and which are purchasing? So the list of procurement activity will be negotiating annual contract with a approved supplier for the grocery, the cleaning, and electronic item.
Yeah.
The second will be monitoring vendor performance. The third will be updating the catalog and revising framework price quarterly. And the last one on the procurement activity will be establishing policy. Example, align local purchase under 500 other styles of that. For the purchasing activity under this scenario will be still making local purchase under 5,000 for urgent needs. Example, the cleaning material, printing and printing cartridge. And the local store manager buying for an unapproved vendor. A transaction that you buy for an unapproved vendor.
Yeah.
So the second question, what risks do the local store manager
pose to the organization? Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead,
sir. Another one will be supply chain disruption.
That's great.
Another risk will be supply chain disruption. And another risk will be cost variability.
Okay.
And the last one of the risks will be repetition damage.
Yeah,
repetition damage. Customers in retail chain.
Okay.
And to answer the third question, how can procurement maintain control with all limiting purchasing flexibility? This question can be answered to balance control and flexibility.
Yeah.
Pre-approved local vendors. In the case, you create a creative list of emergency suppliers. You vet them for quality and purchasing. So you go and vet your certain vendor you can trust. That you are already done business with them and you have them in your database. These people call them pre-approved local vendors.
Yeah.
So the vendor are already in your local base. So anything you want material, you don't have to go through the whole process. The vendor, you have open, you have a closed procurement or closed procurement. Or restricted bidding where you wouldn't use the vendor because they are already being vetted and you don't need going through long process.
Okay, thank you.
And the other one is
sure.
The spend limit. You keep the 500 as a threshold.
Okay.
But require justification for all approved purchase. So your spending limit, you have a spending limit. Like you don't want to procure above that limit.
Yeah, but Sam, Sam, let me hold you there small, right?
Yeah.
The threshold of 500, the stores can make local purchases under 500. So those in the store department, the store manager, any purchase that below 500, he can do that purchase. So the centralized procurement team is overseeing all. But then they gave a threshold for the store. Yeah, so take that into consideration.
So the threshold there, so keep the threshold of 500, but require justification for approved purchases. So that 500 be the threshold. So if you are making any purchase beyond that 500, you have to be justifiable.
That's good. Thank you. Okay, so any other person that make it interactive?
Okay, for what I see, first of all, the company, the retail chain, has already done their procurement planning. Okay, so with that in place, that's true that which they're going to have their chain, their stores receiving constant supplies. But in the process, you have the requirement definition. In it, it's like they already know the kinds of goods they are supposed to supply. It's clearly stated that our counters or shelves will have X, Y, Z for people to see and purchase. Okay. And with that, they go through the tendering and sourcing process, which will lead to the evaluation and selection of their vendors. Those will be supplying them to supply their chain stores. Okay, through that process, they will award their contract, and then the management of that contract is done. Which for me, activities for procurement. The purchasing part is where the contract has been signed, and the purchasing arm of that company or so is responsible to make sure that these goods are supplied constantly with check and balance to make sure that these goods meet up to standard. Okay. Then the risks to the local store manager's action. Well, for me, number one is like he's not going through a process. So it's like he's doing panic purchasing, which could lead him to buy.
That's a key word, panic. Yeah.
Lead him to buy the wrong kind of goods that may not be good. And all these leads to the company name being spoiled at the end of the day, that it provided, they know that it provides substandard goods, but it don't go through no process to make sure that what he's purchasing is substandard. But because somebody needs it, he'll do panic buying and just to satisfy that customer at that point in time.
Okay.
That's what I see there. Then how can procurement maintain a control without limiting purchasing flexibility? Well, to me, it's like if you have an agreement or contract management agreement already in place, I believe that they should stick to what they have planned. And even if you have to do panic buying, there should be some level of professionalism in it. In other words, you should have some level of check and balance. You should not go below certain things, in purchasing in such a way.
Okay. All right.
So
thank you. Thank you, Emmanuel. Who else wants to give the opinion before we move forward? We got one more case study before we close up. Yeah. Okay, so let me just give my final opinion. All of you points are well taken, correct? So let's look at this. Stores can make local purchases under 500 for urgent needs, right? So it means any other thing fall under that threshold, the store can do urgent purchase. But the mistake the stores manager are making is to go and buy from unapproved supplier that will not provide the kind of quality the institution need. So a way to control them is to make sure that they follow those suppliers that are approved in the database. Make sure before they buy, procurement oversee and ensures that they are buying from an approved supplier in the procurement database, which is very important. Another way they can maintain control over purchasing and at the same time maintaining flexibility is to automate the process. So when they automate the process, they already got a system an automated system where you have the database or preferred supplier. So when you want to purchase one of these 500, you just make sure you go to the preferred supplier database, select a supplier, and then do your purchasing. These are suppliers that have been approved by the procurement team. They already approved the supplier. So working with them, the risk is limited, unlike buying from unapproved suppliers. So that's where the local store manager have posed a serious risk to the organization. So another way, if you are a consultant and they call you on this kind of case and say, well, we have this situation where the local store manager are buying from one approved supplier, one way you can solve it. Another way is you can try to limit the urgent or the emergency procurement by doing a real forecasting of needs for the entire entity, so that issue of emergency procurement can just be coming up and a lot of money be wasted. Yes, that's key. So one question and answer time. All right, so I wanted this to meet all of us. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay, I got two questions I want to ask on the case study. And
Okay.
the first one, for case study number 1, the question I want to ask is, how might the procurement process differ if the ministry need emergency supply, example, like during a disease outbreak instead of the long-term planning?
Okay, how can what?
How might the procurement process differ if the ministry need emergency supply, like example, during an outbreak instead of a long-term planning?
Okay. Yeah, that's number 1.
Yeah. Then for case study number 2. Okay, no, I mean ask one more question again for case study number 1 on risk mitigation.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, beyond who's standard, what other due diligence might the team take to avoid supply fraud or delivery failure? So beyond the standard, step, what other due diligence might the team take to avoid supply fraud or delivery failure? That's the 2 questions I have on the first case study.
Yeah. Okay. What other due diligence?
Yeah, what other due diligence might the team take to avoid supplier fraud or delivery failure?
Okay, to take to avoid supplier fraud or delivery failure.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Your question well taken. Anybody else?
Yeah, I have one question for case study number 2. If nobody is there, I'm gonna ask the question.
Yeah, go ahead.
The question I have here is should the 500 threshold for the local purchase be adjusted for a high cost region? How will procurement determine this? If the
should the 500 threshold?
Yeah, for the local purchase be adjusted for high cost region. How will the procurement determine this?
Okay.
If we are adjust that 500 threshold, how will the procurement be able to determine this?
Okay, how will the procurement determine it, right?
Yeah, I think that's all the question I have on the 2 scenarios.
Okay, who else?
Yeah, when you talk about supplier scorecard, what are we referring to?
Okay, supplier scorecard, very good. That's great. I want to dig deeper. Okay, so let me start from
when you're talking about a market research done by a procurement manager, how is it done?
Okay, then, so market,
purchase order. I mean, I want to see a sample of a purchase order. I mean, what is the difference between purchase order and invoice?
Okay, I will talk about that. Difference between purchase order and invoice, right?
Yeah, also payment voucher.
Okay, all right. Thank you. So let me start on the last question. and claim all the way to the first. So you ask about a payment voucher, right? A payment voucher is the kind of document that approve payment in an institution. So when you're raising a payment voucher, it means you're approving payment for that supplier. That's the payment voucher. So the difference between an invoice and a purchase order. The purchase order normally comes from the procuring entity to the supplier. It's issued from the procuring entity to the supplier, and it has the goods, quantity and everything on it, the kind of goods they need. So it's normally sent from the procuring entity to the supplier. Now the invoice comes from the supplier to the procuring entity. After the supplier has delivered, he raises the invoice for the contract he has done, the goods he has supplied, or the service he has rendered, and then he sends the invoice. He sends the invoice to the procuring entity to process his payment. So that's the difference between an invoice and a purchase order. So you talk about market research. Now, market research is done in two ways. You can do it by doing primary market research, where you go and collect data from different vendors, different suppliers. You search the internet. Also, you can do market research. You go into trade journals. You can also do market research from there. So there are a lot of sites that you can do it. So you can do what we call questionnaire. You do the questionnaire and make sure you ask suppliers or other stakeholders in the field and collect information about your product. Another form you can do market research is to do what we call request for information. So when you request for information from the supplier, you get information on the supplier price, you get information on his business structure, on the kind of things he does. So from there, you got a lot of information. So there are so many ways to do market research. Maybe the day we'll have the next webinar, I'm going to dig a whole slide into market research. So you got primary market research and secondary market research. Primary market research is what you do when you send questionnaire. You're not looking at any other document. You just send questionnaire out to people to get information about the market. But the secondary research, where there are existing documents that you go and search, like trade journal, like magazine, like supplier customer feedback. These are existing documents you go and search. So that's two ways you can do it, depending on the nature of the procurement you are doing. So we say supplier scorecard is talking about supplier performance. You can give a scorecard to the supplier based on your performance in terms of quality, quantity, timeliness, delivery, all of that. You can prepare a scorecard for the supplier. The day we're doing supplier relationship management, I will show you an example of what supplier scorecard is. It's all about monitoring the performance of supplier and grading them. That's a supplier scorecard. So for example, you want to choose a supplier, you go to the scorecard will give you all of his performance, whether he's good at delivering quality product or he's always late in delivery, but maybe he can deliver quality, but he's always on time. You can analyze his scorecard. So that's a supplier scorecard. So we come to case study number 2. Should the 500 threshold be adjusted? How should procurement determine this? Now, this is a very important question. Yeah, the 500 threshold can be adjusted. They can reduce the threshold maybe to $100. Make sure that store manager, anything below or from 100 down can buy. Because what they want to do is to reduce what we call my very spend. Any spend that is not going through the approved procurement process is on my very spend. And you want to eliminate that. So you want to incorporate 400 from that money into the wider procurement process to be able to make sure that you have larger discount for goods and services that you want to procure. So that's another way you can do that adjustment to make sure you reduce that. Another way also, you can make sure that you have a monitoring arm. Make sure that the purchaser, before he purchases from any supplier, he should receive approval from the procurement officer or procurement director. That is very key. So let's see the question that says, you say beyond the standard, what other due diligence should the procuring entity take, right? Am I?
The question I asked on case 1, I said, how can the procurement process differ if the ministry need emergency supply, example like during Ebola or outbreak?
Okay, yeah. Now these are special cases, right? So the procurement process in an emergency situation doesn't really go through the bureaucracy you go through in normal situation. That's just it. Once there's an emergency where people are dying, COVID-19, the ministry need medical supply, they will not go through a regular billing process. No. Emergency procurement in that sense is to make sure you that way you must always have a good preferred supplier base. Now, in case of emergency, you cannot go through a rigorous bureaucratic procurement process. You just use that preferred supplier. That will reduce your risks.
So that means they will not be strategic, but instead of being tactical in the procurement.
They have to be tactical in nature because it's emergency. You remember purchasing deal with immediate needs, right? So they gotta be tactical, they gotta be operational at that point. It's a national emergency. You can't say you're waiting for a supplier, but then you can't do pay opening. No, you gotta procure that material. So that's an emergency. So that's how you do. So you are in a tactical operational form. Yeah.